Women, if you do not speak up against this international law, your rights and your children's rights will be taken away. I'm talking about the Hague Convention International Aspects of Child Abduction, an international treaty that began in 1980. Now, I believe that this law was put in place with seemingly noble intentions to take back children who are believed to be abducted internationally back to their countries. Here's the catch though. Most of the people whom this law is used against are abused women fleeing situations with their children, and these are abusive situations. According to a Time article, research indicates that about 70% of the abducting parents in cases under this treaty are mothers, and many of them are fleeing abusive spouses. Hi, my name is Jemimah, and I am a mother, a survivor of domestic violence, and a survivor of narcissistic abuse. I have been physically separated from my children who were 2 years old and 1 year old respectively because of this Hague Convention law. Well, how is it possible if there was domestic violence evidence? Many people ask me this. Well, if you give me a few minutes, I will explain how and more importantly, why this may affect your local legal system. Apparently, in the Hague Convention, there is a defense called Article 13 for children that states that if there is a grave risk that his or her return would expose the child to physical or psychological harm or otherwise place the child in an intolerable situation, the state is not bound to order the return of the children. In my case, I provided almost 20 pieces of evidence which included my children witnessing domestic violence, physical abuse while I held my children, their father administering alcohol to our 2-year-old son, and the eviction of my children and I from our home by their father and his family when I applied for a restraining order. There was even real-time witness reports of domestic violence and child abuse. Despite the evidence, the court made this statement: "I don't believe her." This took me back to movements where women held up signs that said "Believe women," and I could not believe that it was happening to me in the year 2019. The court surely wasn't with me and my children when we were suffering in the hands of an abuser. The second problem is the threshold of domestic violence evidence is measured against past cases, which include mine. In my case, I basically needed to be close to dead or hospitalized to be able to leave an abusive relationship. Why should a woman with children wait that long, especially after there's been a verbal threat on their lives? The other truth is that my children and I were Canadian citizens without legal status in Nevada, which was part of the immigration abuse. The Canadian consulate helped my children and I return to Canada as they evaluated that we were in distress in a foreign country. Here's what the Hague Convention is also designed to ignore: citizenship of children's country, immigration status, the mother's state of being, and whether a mother would face criminal action in returning to the previous country of the abuser. In fact, after an order was made urging me to return to the access of my abuser with my children, a private investigator was allowed by the judge to escort us to Nevada. It was also revealed that this private investigator has traveled with numerous prisoners before. We were not informed if he had traveled with children before. So how would such an injustice exist for so long and you haven't heard about it? Well, because most mothers return to an abusive situation due to the threat of losing all custody of their children. They go to face adverse courts, prejudiced custody cases because of the previous Hague Convention high threshold. And even worse, some are sent to situations where they would face criminal action. As a result, their voices are never heard. I, on the other hand, refused to return to an abuser in such an undignified manner. I refused to return for my own safety. I understood that the justice system had failed not only me, but also my children. It was a tough choice because I was still breastfeeding my youngest son. But I would not let myself disappear like the other women. I had to be strong, in a position to speak up, and tell my story in order to truly advocate for the truth of what happened. I lost all custody of my children. My children now live with the man that abused us. The court in Nevada has ruled that this is not a case involving domestic violence, despite evidence. I have been threatened with criminal action for taking my children away from an abusive situation, and they have supported the children's father's perjury in court and supported his violation of custody orders. In their defense, they say they had no choice. Well, there is always a choice. So do you think that separation from children from their primary caregiver would cause children psychological harm, as stated in Article 13? I'm sure you do, especially if you have children of your own. But the Hague Convention in Canada simply does not. Canada actually takes to a hybrid model where Canadian law and the Hague Convention have to intersect. Unfortunately, I can tell you a couple of places where it actually did not. And I can tell you a couple of places where my children's best interest was just not considered. Oral evidence was never given. And so this is my story. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is real life involving a real mother and real children. And I know that my story matters despite what the court wanted me to believe. And don't get me wrong, I love Canada as a country, and my values align with most of its values. My children and I are Canadian citizens. And this is why I have begun a petition called Change Hague Convention Law in Canada, to bring attention to how this law has not only affected my family, but many other women all around the globe. Apparently, about 101 countries have signed this treaty, including Mexico and the United States. So I urge you to look into how it will affect women and their evidence in your country. The truth is that right now, the impact of this threshold of abuse where women need to be close to dead to leave abusive relationships is being enforced in international law. And it is just a matter of time that it is enforced as the threshold in the local law of countries, because women are being sent back to the local law of certain countries. If we do not speak up now, we will lose the rights of our children and women's rights. Yes, I'm talking about your mother, your sisters, your aunts, your daughters, your sons. This could happen to any woman or child that travels. Like I said in the beginning, this law probably began with noble intentions, and I'm sure that there are some legitimate cases where it takes children back to the appropriate situation. But with the numbers being about 70% of abused women being negatively affected, we have to assess whether it is doing more harm than good to women's rights and children's rights. Sometime in the future, my children will ask me what I was doing when they were forced out of my care, and I will be able to say that I was standing up for them and speaking up for not only their rights, but the rights of all mothers and children. So what are you doing in 2020 to defend your rights? If this video compels you, please share it, and go and sign the petition by Googling Change Hague Convention Law in Canada and find out if your country is a signer of this international law. And if you or a woman you know has been negatively affected by this law, connect with me on my petition page and start your own local advocacy in your country. The more awareness and real stories that we can bring to this cause, the higher the likelihood of change. Thank you so much for watching this video with me today.